And welcome back to another installment of Ask the Rev. The Rev is in the house. I am the Rev, Mike Carey, pastor of the First United Methodist Church of Nevada, and it's good to be able to greet you this afternoon and to be able to respond to your questions. Remember, if you have questions, just send them in to me, email or on Facebook or whatever the case may be, and we'll spend a little time trying to answer them here. I'd like to try and answer these spontaneously, just like we would if you and I were having a conversation face to face. I wouldn't have time to go and say, wait a second, let me go look that one up and I'll get back to you. We would be just in casual conversation, pastor to parishioner, friend to friend, that way. And that's how I prefer to answer these. Now, sometimes you stump me, and so I've got to go back and do a little research. But that's not so much the case today. This question comes from a parishioner, and a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the whole idea of forgiveness and how forgiveness is hard. And the question is, do you really believe in forgiveness? And the question that comes from our parishioner is, what if I say I forgive someone something, but I don't forget it? Have I really forgiven that person? It's the old case of forgive and forget. We're all familiar with that. And if you don't forget, you haven't forgiven. Well, au contraire. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. And I'll tell you why. Number one, remember, forgiveness is not something that you are necessarily giving to the person who has offended you. Forgiveness is something that you give to yourself. It is a gift of God to you. It releases you from all sorts of bad things, the whole lust for vengeance, getting even, putting that person in their place, those kinds of things. Those are what the Bible refers to as the root of bitterness, harboring those kinds of feelings. They poison your spirit, they take your joy away from you. And really, I don't want to give anybody else that power over me, the power of taking my joy from me. That's between me and the Lord, and I want that to be fresh and vibrant every day. And so I'm not going to let somebody else do that to me, because then they've done me dirt twice. Not only have they offended me, but also they've succeeded in taking my joy away from me because they've made me want to get even or just anger. But what about the idea of forgetting? If I really forgive, do I really forget? No, I don't agree with that. The reason why is because your brain is the greatest computer that's ever been devised. And we simply, when something goes in, when something gets programmed in, it doesn't get deleted. We don't have a delete button. Now, God has a delete button, but memory is, a powerful thing. And to look at someone and remember, this is what they did, this is what they said, to forget it, that's hard. That's very, very hard. As I said, God has a delete button. And if you take it to the Lord in prayer, and God can release you from that, He's quite capable. My experience is that often He does not. That the memory is there. So if I say I forgive somebody but I don't forget, what's going on? Well, I can forgive you and free myself and let you know that I have forgiven you. And I can go back to treating you in a manner that is free from bad feeling. And because God can give me that ability to do that. But just because I've forgiven you doesn't necessarily mean I have to trust you, or that I can trust you, or that I should trust you. Meaning you, meaning the person that has offended you. In fact, in many cases, trusting a person who has done you wrong, at least right off the bat, would be not the wisest thing to do. Trust is something that is earned, and now I think that's going to vary with every situation and every person. You might be more willing to trust somebody, one person, sooner and more so than you would somebody else. It depends on the situation. It depends upon the slight. Was the thing that offended you really an honest mistake, an accident, or was it something that you simply took incorrectly? I had a friend of color one time who got offended with me because, and I won't use the term, but I used a term in casual conversation that is a term used in playing cards when you are supposed to play a particular suit and you don't, you play something else. And there's a term for that which I won't use, but most of you, if you're a card player, you know the term I'm referring to. He was not aware of that term, and he took it to mean that I was using a racist, demeaning term and directed towards him. When I realized that, I was very, very quick to try and explain, no, 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 that wasn't what I was meaning, what I was doing. I was referring to playing cards and somebody who wasn't doing what they were supposed to do, somebody who is going back on a promise and a commitment. He understood what I was saying, but the hurt of that, of hearing that come out of my mouth, bothered him. And so it took a while for him to get his head around that and to realize that I hadn't intentionally meant to offend him. But still, he heard it, and it took him a while to get past that. Now, that is, some people would say that's a relatively minor thing. I don't think it was a minor thing, but because I totally believe that racism is, and prejudice and bigotry are all terribly, terribly wrong. But let's take it to another level, shall we? The whole idea of perhaps a spouse cheating sexually on another spouse. That's a big one, and as big as it is, not that uncommon, so we can kind of get our heads around that fairly easily. And that's the illustration that I used in the message a couple of weeks ago, and about how the wife, after several weeks, decided she was going to go home and was going to try and work things out, and her mother was disapproving of that. That is a situation where you can forgive, but trust in given situations is going to be something that comes hard, that's going to take some time, and that those kinds of issues are things that you need to take to the Lord in prayer. When you say, we realize, okay, I'm having trouble with trust here, I've got some trust issues going on here, you need to go to God and say, Lord, this is what's going on. I have forgiven this person, but I'm having trouble trusting this person. I'm not comfortable with them in this particular situation or scenario. Help me get past this. Now, also becomes the question, too, of is the person who's committed the offense trustworthy? Okay? The old saying goes back, hurt me once, shame on you. Hurt me twice, shame on me. How does that fit into the whole forgiveness thing? Well, I can forgive you, but I can also say I'm not going to allow myself to be put into a situation again where you'll have the opportunity to do that again because I don't trust you. If a person, trust takes time. And I do not begrudge anybody the time to reestablish trust within themselves. It's like when I was a young person learning to drive and had just gotten my driver's license, and I did a stupid thing, and I got a ticket. And not only did I lose my license for 30 days, I lost my privilege to drive the family vehicle for another 30 days beyond that. Why? Because I had violated trust. Not just trust of being a responsible driver, but trust of my father to use the vehicle and to use so in a responsible way. Now, after another 30 days beyond the revocation of my license, slowly but surely I was giving more and more privileges and opportunity as I showed I had learned my lesson and I was trustworthy. And that's always the question. Do people learn their lesson? Do they really, when they say, please forgive me, I realize I was wrong, I have learned from this, I'll never do it again? How soon do you really trust them? Now, the thing with that goes along with this thinking is that realize that God also forgives that person, the offender. If they go to God, if they ask you for forgiveness and they say, I've asked God to forgive me, but I need you to forgive me as well, because that's part and parcel of the whole thing. If somebody sins against you, if they've offended you, that's also a sin against God, and they also need to go to God as well as to you. God is much more magnanimous than we are when it comes to the whole idea of forgiveness. The scripture tells us that God takes our sin and throws it over his shoulder into the sea of his forgetfulness. It sinks to the bottom and he sees it no more. So if you keep going back to God with something that you have done and you say, Lord, you remember that thing that I've done? God says, no, I don't. See, God has the ability to forgive and forget and to do so perfectly. That's why you don't need to come back to God asking forgiveness for the same thing over and over again, unless you're doing it over and over again. Because God forgives and forgets. Once he does, that's it. You don't need to worry about it again. But the guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. We feel guilty about it, and that's human nature. That's not God. That's simply human nature coming after you. So what happens if I say I forgive, but I'm just saying it? If if you mean it or not. So let's get past that right away. If you really forgive a person or not. And if it keeps coming back to you, just realize that's human nature. That could also be the devil, trying to prod you a little bit. And you can say, get thee behind me, Satan, because I have forgiven that person. This is over and done with, as far as I'm concerned. But just remember, forgiveness is a gift that you give to yourself, and therefore you really would. So keep that in mind as you forgive. May the Lord bless you now today. May he encourage you. Amen.